is the Greg Belfrage Show.
6 minutes past 8, mostly cloudy and 70. Welcome to the Greg Belfrage Show. Great to have you here this morning. Portion brought to you by Stone Group Architects. Visit stonegrouparchitects.com for more information. Stone Group Architects, designers, planners, visionaries. Well, as you know, we've had a couple of recent conversations recently in regard to ambulance service in Sioux Falls, questions that some of our city councilors have had. Sioux Falls City Councilor Pat Starr was here recently to both allay, I think, concerns following some media reports, but also to express some of questions that he has. So joining us this morning is Jill Franken from the City Health Department. Jill, it's nice to finally meet you. Welcome.
Nice to meet you too, Greg.
And
Thanks for having me.
We're very glad to do it. And Gary Meyers is also here, and you're the chair of the REMSA board. And I always forget what REMSA stands for, Gary.
Good morning. Yes, the Regional EMS Authority.
All right. I'm not sure where to start. Maybe with some of the media reports. Jill, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Some of the media reports that were out there in regard to ambulance service and maybe creating a perception that there are a whole lot of cases where ambulances just don't show up, and that's not necessarily reality.
That's correct. That's correct, Greg. And thank you so much. This is awesome to be on this show this morning. And we do want to continue to make sure the community is aware that we have an EMS system that is high functioning, high quality, and really performing well for the residents of this community. We have a contract in place with Paramedics Plus, and that contract has been in place since 2015, and that's a contract with basically the city. The city council approved that, and within that there's a number of really stringent requirements that they have to be able to meet in order to provide ambulance service in Sioux Falls. And Paramedics Plus is our provider, and they are doing that. They're meeting every bit of their contract obligations and more, and are always striving to improve the quality and the coordination of service with the EMS system partners.
I know part of the concern has been that people are either waiting what they feel is an inordinate amount of time for an ambulance to arrive, or that we have situations that arrive where there's an ambulance that's not immediately available to be dispatched. That's not unusual, correct? Regardless of who the provider is.
That's correct. They prioritize, and Gary, you can jump in here anytime, but we prioritize our calls based on the severity and the level of emergency. There's life-threatening emergencies. That would be one level of priority, the top. And then there's non-life-threatening emergencies, and then there's non-emergency transports. The majority of our calls and the work that our EMS system does is really in that non-emergency transport area. And so those are actually transports that somebody needs to get to the hospital for something that is urgent to them, but it isn't prioritized as an emergency based on the call that comes in and the information that's relayed. So those are individuals that, just like going to the emergency department, those are calls that might end up being triaged, and as the EMS system is able to arrive, they do. But they still, regardless, are required to do so within a certain time frame, 90% of the time, and they do so.
Gary, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I think one thing that we always want to make sure that everyone that is interested in this conversation remembers and realizes is that we have an EMS system. We have an ambulance provider that is contracted to do the transportation and care in an ambulance. But in Sioux Falls, we have a system. And I think there's a perception out there that if the fire department is there and taking care of a patient, that's something is wrong. But that's part of the system. That's part of what we plan out. When we have a REMSA meeting, when we have leadership meetings to talk about our system, the fire department is always there because they're part of the system. So when the fire department's there before the ambulance, that's what's supposed to happen. If the police department's there and helping out, that's what's supposed to happen. That's not an issue.
But I know one of the things that City Councilor Pat Starr brought up is contractually, aren't those firefighters prohibited? There's only a certain amount of care that they can provide. Is part of what he was saying, that they can go so far there, and they can't go beyond. Is that an issue?
contractually is, I don't know if that's the word I would use. I'm not familiar with what their contract would say. But as far as what they're able to do as providers, as EMTs and or paramedics, right now they all function as EMTs. They get their care direction from REMSA as well. All of their care guidelines come from REMSA. So the only thing that they're not able to do that compared to a paramedics plus EMT, because they have their EMTs and paramedics,
right,
is transport the patient because they don't have the vehicle. But otherwise, they're doing all the care that any other EMT out there does.
All right. And I think that's really important for people to understand. Sure. And so when we talk about some of these with ambulance response times, that has nothing to do with fire rescue that's already on the scene.
Absolutely. And so ambulance response to the scene is not when the care starts. In a system of care like we have in Sioux Falls, we have to look at when the care starts. And if the ambulance is not there to do the next level of care, which is, take the patient from the first responder, the police, fire, and do the transport to the hospital, the care starts when that first responder, when that first group of people that are part of our system get there. That's the important number to remember.
Yep.
So how do you respond to clearly, some of this was driven by media reports, as you know, and people, there are people that are complaining. I think that's also what's motivating some of our city councilors. They're hearing from people who say they felt they had to wait an inordinate time, some of whom are transporting a patient and without knowing the circumstances. As you said, a lot of this may be where it's not critical or not an immediate emergency, but people are taking it upon themselves to transport somebody to the hospital. There certainly seems to be some level of concern in the community about this.
Healthcare is an industry where people are not always happy, whether it's EMS or the hospital or legislation around healthcare.
Sure.
That's unfortunate, and there will always be concerns out there, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't voice their concerns. They absolutely should. That is our job, to hear those concerns and look at the system of care and make sure that we're addressing those concerns as much as possible, as much as makes sense in our system. And remember that, yes, there are people out there with concerns. I won't call them complainers because I think that has a negative connotation. They're voicing their concerns. But there is a whole lot of people out there that are not saying anything, that are very happy with the care they're getting.
And I would also say that I would highly encourage anyone who has a concern with any segment of our EMS system to contact the health department. We provide the quality oversight of the ambulance service, but also are in charge of really looking at the system as a whole and making sure that we have a good quality system. And I'm not getting the kind of complaints that I'm hearing are out there, and that has to come to us so that we can actually, if there is a concern that can be corrected, we need to do that. And so I really encourage people to actually call us when they have a concern.
Jill Franken is with the City Health Department. Gary Meyers is the chair of the REMSA board. Jill, you were just talking about oversight. And Gary, I'm going to ask the same question of you here in a moment. In terms of oversight of these kinds of things, what do you do at the City Health Department in that regard?
We have a quality assurance coordinator. Her name is Julie Charbonneau, and she is in charge of really making sure that every data point, all our measurable criteria is really looked at, and that we're tracking to assure that every element of the contract is being complied with the ambulance service, so with Paramedics Plus. But then in addition to that, she really looks at the system as a whole. She actually reviews almost every call. She is looking at every single call every day, is helping to convene it's called a pulse call review process, where they look at the calls from the prior day and they're looking at opportunities to improve. If there's things that need to be accomplished to make those improvements, whether it's how it was dispatched, perhaps a call, maybe it was something related to something with the element that the fire does when they get on scene. Maybe it's something that the ambulance provider could improve upon on scene. Anything that can be improved upon, but also looking for just opportunities. Is there new equipment that we need to be taking advantage of that could help us with our response and being more responsive? But it's looking not just at timely response, but also the quality of the care that's provided.
So, Gary, same question to you as the REMSA board. First of all, maybe I probably should have started, for those who aren't familiar with the board, give us a little bit of overview of what you do, and then in particular in regard to ambulance and some of these, what kind of oversight is your group responsible for?
And thanks for the opportunity to explain, because I think that is always there's some misconceptions out there. The REMSA board is a group of citizen volunteers. That's all I am, as a volunteer. I wanted to be on the REMSA board. I applied. I was picked and appointed by the city council, but I receive no remuneration for that at all. And so we're just a group of citizens that really want to be involved in the emergency response system. And oversight, I think, I look at it as more of being a partner. The Health Department of Health is one of those partners. Fire, police, Paramedics Plus, Metro 911 Communications. We're all partners in this, making sure that we have the best emergency response system that we can have, one of the best in the country, in my opinion. So as REMSA's oversight, this group of citizen volunteers, things are brought to us from the partners, options, issues, and we listen to those things, and they give us choices. They say, we want to do this or that. We have this piece of equipment that we think is be good placed here. We want to respond this way. This is our plan. We get involved in those discussions as representing the citizens, and we make our recommendations. We vote. Just like any other body of people, we vote on what they bring us. And then there's another board, which is the medical board, which is made up of medical professionals from the hospital systems here in town, equally represented by all the hospital systems here in town. And they specifically review those calls, talk about medications, change this medication dosing to that. And then they make a recommendation, bring that to REMSA. The case is made, and we say, yes, that sounds like a good change. That's what we do. We're that citizen board. We're that citizen arm that can weigh in on these discussions that all of the paid members, I guess so to speak, police, fire, ambulance, and the health department, that they're talking about. And
I think to clarify that, because that was a misconception, I think that might have been put out there in some of the media, that the REMSA board, when we say members, we as the health department, fire department, police department, Paramedics Plus, they attend those meetings, but we are not part of that board. We're not members of that board.
Sure.
We're just providing information to them. We're bringing recommendations. We're bringing guidelines. We're bringing protocols, workflows, etc. Things for either their information or for their approval.
Yep. Let me ask, and I'm just throw it out there, and either one of you or both of you respond to it. And that is, I know there was a recent meeting with the city council that was intended, I think, to be fairly short and wound up being quite lengthy, some 2 hours plus, in regard to this issue. And some frustration voiced on the part of some councilors. Even one of the Minnehaha County commissioners, who was in the newspaper, whose name we do not speak, at least here, was in the newspaper saying that, he feels he's part of the Metro Jeff Barth, part of the Metro Communications board, and saying he feels there needs to be more transparency on some of these issues in regard. How do you respond to them?
My response to that would be that if there is information that needs to be shared, call me. Call Gary Meyers. Call someone who has that information, who knows that. I get so few actual direct contacts from anyone. The city councilors that are concerned about this rarely, if ever, actually call me.
Do we deal through the media too much?
Yes.
I mean, we go to the media and rather than communicating to each other about what's happening?
Yeah, that's probably my biggest frustration, is that I sit in the council meetings, I sit in different meetings, and I hear all these things. And Jeff Barth, I've never met the man. I've never seen him in person. And he's talking about REMSA and issues need to change and REMSA needs to change. Never seen him at a meeting. Never have talked to him. There's been 2 city councilors since I've been on REMSA board that have come to a REMSA meeting, and I really appreciate that. There are other people that are out there talking in the media about the ambulance and REMSA that have never been to a REMSA meeting. It's monthly. It's in the health department building. It's in a big conference room. It's not back in a hole somewhere. It's very accessible, and we welcome everyone. There's plenty of seating. If somebody comes, I'm happy to ask them if they have anything that they want to talk about, but it doesn't happen.
That doesn't sound like a lack of transparency.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
And, and in fairness, back last fall, when we were doing some performance improvement work around the EMS system, there was a fair amount of questions that were asked. There was contact to our department. But then we responded to that, and we provided information. We shared with them what we were doing, and I think we did it in quite a bit of detail, and we made the system even better as a result.
So what do you think are maybe some of the biggest misperceptions that people have right now, whether it's from media reports or elsewhere, in regard to what's happening with our ambulance service?
I think the biggest misperception is that there is a problem. That, to me, is the biggest misperception. I think people are given a certain amount of information, maybe one-sided or at least not the full story, and they make their snap judgments based on that. And I think that it's an industry, EMS in general, but emergency healthcare, or let's just say healthcare from the point of first medical contact to all the way to the emergency department, is something that most people only experience once or twice in their whole lives, if ever. And to make a snap judgment on an industry that you may never touch, saying that, well, 97%, why can't we make 100%? 100% is extremely impossible, difficult, extremely difficult to do in an industry like this, whether it's in the emergency room or whether it's out on the street. I think we need to look at what people need to understand what the industry standards are and what is good healthcare. Is 50% good? No, but 97, 96, 95% is extremely good, and it exceeds the expectations that we put forward several years ago when we put the contract together. Exceeds.
I think the other misperception is around how we partner with our outlying ambulance services and EMS.
Thank you, because that was one of the other things I wanted to ask about.
Yeah, we this whole notion of mutual aid has gotten, in my mind, really blown out of proportion.
Why do you say that? What are we misunderstanding?
Well, because, one of the things that we in good faith did last fall, this entire system, and when I use we, I use that loosely because my team really was part of the discussions in that, but it was really the EMS system that is doing the work that really came up with new protocols, new way of operating that could assure that we are using all the resources in our community and surrounding communities to the best of our ability. And one of those was, how do we reach out for mutual aid when it's needed? As Paramedics Plus came on board, they were a new service in our town, and they were a new leadership providing ambulance service. So once they got all the quirks worked out, and they were doing that in fine fashion and right out of the gate doing well, there was some communication things that need to be shored up around when and how and for what purposes we needed to call mutual aid.
Let me stop you just for a moment. For those maybe mutual aid, what are we talking about? When you refer to mutual aid, just so listeners who maybe aren't totally familiar, they know what you're referring to.
Mutual aid, what we have defined now, really not defined now, but mutual aid is any time you need to utilize a resource outside of what you have in your community for whether it's ambulance service or firefighting or whatever the case may be. So there's mutual aid for a major fire. You might reach out to your surrounding communities to have trucks come in to help combat that fire.
We've seen that.
Yes, we have seen that. And so that would also be the case for ambulance. If our system is overloaded because of a plane crash, heaven forbid, okay? But that's when you might bring in those resources. We were bringing them in for when we were at system overload, which means our ambulances were all being asked to do more than beyond what you would consider the norm for that particular time period of day or night. And so we just needed to understand, why were we doing that? Why were we calling mutual aid, especially when it was for perhaps a non-emergency situation? And so they really did some work to say, we are only going to call mutual aid when it's for a life-threatening emergency, if it's needed, and after certain conditions are met, where we have fully communicated with everyone on the team to make sure that we need to do that. So we went from in the fall and around maybe September, October, I want to say, to maybe having about a dozen mutual aid calls in about a 6-month time frame, to we've only had 2 in the last 6 months time frame. And so I think we've made some vast improvements. It leaves those resources in those communities. We're not taking an ambulance out of those small communities, leaving them there for their use, and making sure that we are maximizing all the resources in our community.
Yeah, I think the one part of that whole story that is being missed is the moving target a little bit. About a year ago, it was asked by city council and media, why are we calling mutual aid all the time? So we looked at it, the process, and said, how can we better our process? And we came up with a better process, and it works very well. And now the issue becomes, why aren't you calling mutual aid? Why don't you have a mutual aid agreement with this service or that service?
Right,
You know, it's the moving target that with only a certain amount of information, people are making snap judgments. And I think if you stand back and look at the whole system, you know, it works very well. And mutual aid agreements, we keep hearing about mutual aid agreements. They're not required in South Dakota. So we have the contract that we have with Paramedics Plus, that the city has with Paramedics Plus, says that they have to have at least one. They have two. That's it. There's no requirement beyond that for ambulance services to help each other out, to have a contract in place. And let's not forget, this was brought up before, Metro 911 Communications does not dispatch based on mutual aid agreements. They based on who's closest. So they're not wondering if there's a mutual aid agreement when they push a button for this service or that service, whether they have an agreement or not. That's a business contract between two entities. When it comes down to the 911 call, they don't make decisions based on that.
It is 27 minutes past 8. Jill Franken of the City Health Department and Gary Meyers, who is the chair of the REMSA board, have been my guests. That whole half hour just zipped right by.
Sure did.
Anything else you want to add that we haven't touched on?
You know, I just thank you for the opportunity. And again, I want to encourage everyone, if there is a question, reach out to the City Health Department. And my door is open. I'm a citizen volunteer, but I'm more than willing to answer questions. And the REMSA door is always open during our meetings. So if you have questions or concerns, please ask.
And please know that you should have confidence in your EMS system. And if you have an emergency, call 911.
Well, listen, thanks again to you both. I really appreciate you taking time to come down here. It is 8:27. We're going to get to the Fox Business Report just ahead. State Senator Reynold Nessiba is going to join us ahead. Talking about a variety of different issues with him. They're looking at, there's already a number of initiated